Welcome to our and a new section called Writing Sessions. We will analyze some of the formats and types of writing, and in this occasion we are going to see how to write a narrative story. In this video we will analyze the definition of story and narrative and the difference between them. We will also see the narration or narrative as a type of formal writing. We will see some tools we need to write correctly, and then we will analyze the sample. I hope after this video we are able to write our own story. I hope you like it. Let's go! So let's start and have a look at how to write a narrative or a story. Let's see this image. Whenever we take a picture, we want a moment to be remembered forever, right? So when we take pictures, we want to tell a story. We want to remember something or share that memory with someone. And if we look at this beautiful picture, some questions pop up immediately, like where was the photo taken? Who is that person? Is that person all right? Is he or she having fun? Oh, the water is so clear. What about the mountains? Where the place? What time? Was it winter? Was it summer? So when we want to know a story, we usually need to know things like who are the people involved in the story, where all the events are happening, what's happening, what are those events, how happened, how is that person got to be there on the stone, when, why, and what after, all the things that happened after that very nice moment. All those details make up a story, the things that happened. So let's think and define these terms. Narrative or story, are they the same? Well, if we have a look at the definition of the dictionary Cambridge, it says that a narrative is a story or a description of a series of events. So basically, narrative and story are the same. Now, let's have another definition. It says, it's the way you tell it. A narrative is the choice of which events to relate and in what order to relate them. So it is a representation or specific manifestation of the story, rather than the story itself. The easy way to remember the difference between story and narrative is to reshuffle the order of events. A new event order means you have a new narrative of the same story. So here we can draw a difference between these two terms. First of all, the story is all the events that happened, and the narrative is the way you tell it. You can tell the same thing in different ways. So it basically agrees with what the Merriam-Webster says, that a narrative is a way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events that reflects and promotes a particular point of view or set of values. So it adds more to what a narrative is. It is not only the way we tell it, but it also promotes or reflects a particular point of view, that is to say, the writer's point of view or the teller, and a set of values. So we now can talk about the narrative of a story. One story, maybe many narratives. Narratives are open-ended. That means they do not have a resolution. They have an implicit invitation to participate, which allows listeners to play a role in what the result is going to be. There is something that it is in the process of unfolding. The end is yet to be determined. And there is an invitation for all of us to participate in that narrative, to help determine what the outcome is going to be. So when narrating a story or writing a story, there is an implicit invitation to the reader to participate. So basically, we are making another person part of what happened or part of our story. So, as we were saying, one story can have 1,000 ways of telling it or of representing it. So there can be 1,000 narrations. Now we have left clear the difference between narrative and story. Let's analyze the narrative essay as a type of formal writing. We can say that a narrative essay tells a story, hence the writer can take some license to add some more creativity and imagination to the events. But as in any writing, it has to follow a framework to be effective. Let's see what are the essential elements that there ought to be in a narrative. So the first one is the setting. The setting refers to the place where the story takes place and the time. It answers the questions where and when. Another important element is the mood. The mood refers to the atmosphere the writer creates for the story, and it has descriptive vocabulary which sets a happy, suspenseful, scary, or even gloomy scenario. It has to transmit the feelings the writer thinks of to the reader. The characters. The characters are the people in the story. They are affected by the mood, they're placed in the setting, and they will react to the events of the story. So now let's talk about the story itself, all the events happening. And this is what we call the plot. The plot is a sequence of events in the story. These events are meaningful for the characters and transform their state into another. In simpler words, the plot is all that happens to the characters and affect them in a way that make them feel happy or sad or angry and change how they feel or their lives, basically. Now let's have a look at the elements of a plot. Elements help us organize the events in a way that are meaningful and that make sense. We usually use this diagram or this graph to explain how the elements should be sequenced. First of all, the exposition is the first part of our writing, where we explain who the characters are, we explain the setting, where and when the story happened or is going to happen, and we write what will be considered or developed in the paragraph or in the body paragraphs. Basically, the problem that the characters will face. Then, the rising actions are all the happenings or the turning points that may help the characters reach or not their goal in the story. And that leads us to the climax. This climax is the completion or the lack of success that the characters may have during the story. Did what they wanted to happen really happen or not? That is the climax and the most interesting part of the story. Then after it, the following actions come, where everything is settled until we can finish the story. And this last part is the denouement or the end of the story. Now that we know the essential elements of the story and how to sequence or organize the events, let's have a look at the general framework of a narrative essay, the format itself. Any narrative essay should have three parts: the introduction, the body paragraph or body paragraphs, and a conclusion. In the introduction, we need to include a hook or something catchy so that our reader or readers feel lured or attracted to our story and get ready to start reading. Then we need our thesis statement. The thesis statement generally works as a compass of the story. It is a sentence or two sentences that let the reader know the exact things they are going to read in the body paragraphs. In this case, as we were saying, that this type of writing allows the reader to be more creative, we can say that the thesis statement in a narrative or in a story let the reader know the first part of the story, what the writer wants the reader to know before starting reading the body paragraphs. Basically, the beginning of our story, without much detail about the specific elements that they will find in the body paragraphs. Then, in the body, there should be transitional sentences or sentences that help the ideas connect. Then, in the conclusion, there can be three items. The first one can be a moral, what we have learned or what the writer wants to teach about the whole story. It can also be a prediction, something new that wasn't present in the text before. And this is another important element of narratives, that we can add something new to the conclusion, something unexpected. And this prediction is something that the writer thinks will happen after that story, or even a revelation, a reason why something happened in the story that was hidden until the conclusion, and we come to learn only at the end. And that is a very nice a resource a writer can use, because it keeps the reader waiting until the very end to learn what happened actually, maybe at the beginning or in the middle of the story. Let's now analyze a sample while we review what we were talking about. Let's take as example the same picture we had at the beginning of this video. Let's talk about the setting. The place is in Chalten, a town in Santa Cruz province, Argentina. The picture was taken near the peak of Mount Fitzroy. This Mount Fitzroy is one of the most well-known places for trekking in South America. The lagoon is called Laguna de los Tres, and the picture was taken in January 2020. It was summer, which is a very nice piece of information because it looks really cold actually there. Let's talk about the mood. It was a cold noon. The trekking had started at 5 a.m. when no light was there. We couldn't see a thing, actually. The walk was a bit difficult but enjoyable, and the views were so good. We were tired, freezing and excited, and the peak, as you can see at the bottom of the picture, was awesome, and red first, then it turned gray. So now let's talk about the characters in the story. It was me, the narrator, Gustavo Burgos, and a friend of mine, Natasha Tosi. This is me and my friend. Now let's talk about the plot, the story itself, the sequence of events. First, we decided to visit El Chaltén in order to walk the trekking trail to Laguna de los Tres near the peak of Mount Fitzroy. The Mount Fitzroy is the mountain that you can see at the bottom of this picture, at the right top. Then we reached Laguna Capri base camp at night. We camped there and set out some hours later at 5 p.m. It was late, though it was at night, because we had overslept. After that, we got to see the sunset from there. The view of the peak was perfect. We walked for 7 hours until we got to Laguna de los Tres, and we boiled some water to make tea there and soup in a bottle. As you can see, all the elements in the plot are the story itself, what we want the other people to know. In this case, I have used pictures, which are very helpful to transmit the ideas, the feelings, maybe what the weather was like, or how happy we felt. But usually in a story, we cannot add many images to transmit those ideas. That is why the narrative becomes so important. We can have the plot, the setting, the mood, and the characters, but we need to narrate the story in a way that we make the reader participate of our story, and we let him, her, or them to be part of what we are telling them. That's the importance of a story or a narrative essay. So let's move on to developing the plot. How is it that we can get to narrate the story and write a narrative essay? Focus on these two words, sequence and event. So let's see how we can write our event in the best way. First, we need to use descriptive and specific vocabulary. Why? Descriptive adjectives or descriptive nouns help us set the setting of the place. Was it a nice place? Was it dark? Was it gloomy? Was it mysterious? Was it marvelous? Do the characters feel happy in the story? What happened to them? What is it that they encounter or the problems they face? So let's take this as an example. It was a cold noon, and the trekking had started at 5 a.m. when no light was there. We could not see a thing. In this case, we will analyze an example where everything is clear, but we can do a better job, as in this other example. We are replacing the red squares of the first sentence by the blue squares into the second set of sentences. We will change cold noon by it was freezing at noon by the time we arrived, which gives more information, a lot of more new information. The trekking had started at 5 a.m. when no light was there. We were blinded by the dark. Even though the two expressions are okay, the second one gives more details about how the characters felt in the story. Then we will analyze this example when the information is a bit vague or it is not as specific as the reader may want to read, actually. The views were so good. We usually say that when writing a narrative essay, we should avoid basic words or basic adjectives like good, bad, nice. We have a great variety of adjectives to describe things, so we are going to replace this so good. What do we mean by so good? Let's have a look at this example. The views were stunning, and we will add more information. The peak of the mount was magnificent and the water pristine. You could feel the cold breeze on your face, which added a satisfactory feeling. So as you can see, being more specific brings more detail and information to the writing, and the reader knows more about what happened. And if we are going to write an essay for an exam, it helps us add a lot of more words. Let's talk about the events in the use of adverbs. Let's see this first example. Mark was watching his favorite television show when suddenly the presenter announced he was that week's home winner. So suddenly is an adverb of time which adds emphasis to the happiness that Mark might be feeling. Another example is of adverbs modifying an adjective, as in the first case, and a verb, as in the second. Joshua was bitterly disappointed after his performance in the game. He thought he had played poorly. So, as you can see, we're not using Joshua was sad after his performance. We are going a bit further using another adjective and an adverb and saying bitterly disappointed. It's way better than just writing common adjectives. Another way of telling the events in a catchy way is by using direct speech. Direct speech is using the exact words in a story as a person said it when it happened or when the writer shows it was happening. For example, that was a very dark night and my friend suggested us to camp in the closest base camp. This is the narration, right, of how the story was. Let's change it to direct speech and we can say, that was a very dark night. Let's stay the night in the closest base camp because I am afraid we get lost, said my friend. This idea of using direct speech is also very useful because it can make the reader add voices to the story. And it's better because the reader is engaged with our story, if that happens. Now, let's talk about the sequence. Now, we have seen how to write our events in a way that are comprehensive and fully detailed. Now, let's make them make sense, basically, in order. We know, or we should know, that when writing a story, using the right tense becomes essential or a key element. For sequencing and getting across the message, right tenses are key. We can have detailed events and well-explained happenings, but maybe if we confuse the verb tenses, we can get our reader a bit confused as well. Let's see the most common verb tenses used in a narration. For example, the present simple, the simple past or past continuous, the past perfect simple and continuous, and expressions like would or used to talk about habits in the past. If you don't remember the exact uses of these or of each of these verb tenses, I will advise you to check their uses because in this way you will know which verb tense can be more appropriate to, for example, talking about a past event in the past itself or talking about an action that was common or ordinary in the past and it is not true anymore. And what about active verbs or state verbs? Should I use would or used to? Or what's, for example, the difference between the simple past one when an action was definite and completed, or the past continuous for actions that were in progress or actions that didn't finish? So those details should be checked. Let's see this example. It was a cold noon. The trekking had started at 5 a.m. when no light was there. This is a nice, we have already seen this sentence, and this is a nice example of the use of the past perfect simple and the simple past for a past event in the past itself or the past of the past. As we are talking about something that was finished, it was a cold noon. I want to emphasize that something happened before the cold noon. The trekking had started at 5 a.m. in the morning when no light was there. We couldn't see a thing. The walk was a bit difficult but enjoyable, and the views were so good. Let's see how we can change this second part. The walk was a bit difficult but enjoyable, and the views were so good. And it will help us introduce another element we need to take into account when writing or sequencing events in the story. It was freezing at noon by the time we arrived. The trekking had started at 5 a.m. when no light was there. At that night, we were blinded by the night. Before getting to the peak, the walk was a bit difficult but enjoyable. The views were, and the text goes on. So these elements that are in red at that night or before getting are what we can call connectors and relationship words. There can be many that indicate, as this table shows, chronological order, as next, finally, later, that, now, then, prepositions, after a moment, after the morning, by the time we arrived, for example, or during the walk, during the afternoon, from 5 a.m. till 12, we were walking, we spent that day walking. Or time words that begin clauses like after, as soon as, before, until, when, whenever, or while. You cannot read the asterisk on the screen, but it says that when time clauses occur at the beginning of the sentence, that is to say, when we start a sentence with these words like after, as soon as, before, until, etc., they must be followed by a comma. And it was taken from the book Great Writing 4 by National Geographic. Like, for example, if we start a sentence saying after we arrived, we need to write a comma right after that. So now let's have a look at this sample that says trekking can be tiring. If we analyze the structure, it has one paragraph introduction and 3 body paragraphs and 1 conclusion. Let's see the introduction, which should have a hook or something catchy to grab the reader's attention, and a thesis statement that begins telling the story. Let's see. I had never gone trekking before in my entire life. I think that's catchy. That week of January 2020, my friend Natasha and I talked about it and decided to give the experience a go. Despite we experienced some drawback, that decision became one of the best ones in Calafate. So the thesis statement is the last sentence of the introduction. We can see that there are going to be some drawbacks or possible problems, but then the end can be very, very happy because it was one of the best choices or decisions we made in Calafate. I would like you to analyze the body paragraphs and see how descriptive vocabulary is used, how the sequencing is taking place in the story, and that you can challenge yourself to write your own story. If you want to know more, this is a bibliography I used to create the presentation and to explain basically how to write a narrative story. Great! This was the video then. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time in another writing session.